Shields down! Fire now! All systems to full power! Commander Jarek Vael's orders cracked through the static-filled comms. The desperation in his voice mirrored the chaos unfolding on the ground below. The once bustling capital of Earth, now reduced to smoldering ruins, echoed with the sound of collapsing buildings and the distant cries of those left behind. Flames licked the sky, curling in red spirals that danced like harbingers of death. From the horizon, a deep, guttural rumble reverberated. An alien warship the size of a city, its hull a gleaming black void, hovered above. "Why aren't they retreating?" Jarek muttered under his breath as his fingers flew over the controls, his hands steady despite the intensity. The invaders were relentless, their weapons overwhelming, and humanity had fought tooth and nail, inch by inch, to hold on. But they were losing. The fight was slipping away. The comms crackled again. "Commander Vael, we've got civilians trapped in the west quadrant." "Focus on the defensive lines, Sergeant," Jarek snapped, cutting the transmission short. There was no time for distractions. As much as his heart ached for the innocents, the battle was all-consuming, a raging storm of fire and blood, and if Earth had a chance, it lay in the fleet, his fleet. Suddenly, a distant rumble grew louder, not the deep bass of alien weaponry or the crackling of the destruction around him. This was different. This was something unfamiliar. An odd sense of weightlessness filled the air, as if the very atmosphere itself was holding its breath. Jarek froze, eyes narrowing toward the sky, where something huge emerged from the swirling smoke and debris. It loomed like a shadow against the rising sun, an immense shape that cut through the air, its outline sharp and angular. Its surface was unlike anything Jarek had ever seen. A smooth obsidian black with veins of silver running through it, pulsating like the heart of a living creature. "Is that—" A voice faltered over the comms, filled with awe. "Impossible," Jarek breathed, almost too quiet for anyone else to hear. The black ships, the legends of Earth's forgotten fleet, thought to be nothing more than myths, discarded pieces of ancient history. Their sudden appearance made no sense. How could they have survived 2 millennia of abandonment, the collapse of the first interstellar empire, and all the wars that followed? The massive silhouette moved toward Earth's atmosphere with a terrifying grace. It didn't crash. It didn't burn up. It simply arrived. The ground trembled beneath Jarek's feet as if the very fabric of reality was adjusting to its presence. "Commander Vael," the voice over the comms trembled, "the ships are... They're coming down." Jarek's mind raced. His training, his years of preparation all felt like a blur in the face of this impossibility. The enemy was overwhelming, and now, without warning, these ancient titans had arrived. But why? Were they here to save Earth? Or was this something darker? Before he could answer, the first of the black ships descended through the atmosphere, like a falling star that had forgotten its purpose. The air around it shifted, crackling with energy as its hull shimmered with unseen force. It cut a perfect line through the clouds, its wake burning through the sky in violent arcs of distortion. The enormity of it overshadowed everything, vast, incomprehensible, a relic of a time long lost. Jarek's breath caught as the ship's shadow consumed everything. "What do we do, sir?" asked Lieutenant Callan, a low-ranking officer with a steady voice, standing beside Jarek. His face was a mask of confusion and hope. "We hold the line." Jarek's words were simple, but the weight of them pressed down like 1,000 tons. There was no turning back now. A crackling voice cut through the comms, a deep, metallic resonance. "We are the last watchers. You have been waiting for us." The voice, though artificial, was startlingly calm, like a deep, echoing bell from a forgotten time, reverberating through the static in a way that sent a shiver down Jarek's spine. It was neither a command nor a plea, but a cold statement of fact. The black ships had returned, and they were not here by accident. Jarek's pulse quickened. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice steady, but the tension in his grip betrayed his unease. He had to know more. Who had sent them? Were they truly a salvation or something worse? "Your salvation, Commander Vael, and your judgment." The words echoed through the comms, and Jarek felt a strange chill crawl down his spine. He didn't trust it. Not yet. He couldn't. "Sir, the alien fleet is—" Callan's voice cut through the tension, his words tremulous. But Jarek was already moving. "Status on our forces." "They're scattered, Commander. We can't hold the line much longer." "Then we do what we have to do," Jarek replied, turning toward the battlefield once more. "Prepare to engage. All hands, follow my lead. This is Earth's last chance." His eyes flicked to the black ship above, its presence now undeniable. His heart hammered against his ribs. The fleet had come, and in this moment their intentions were as murky as the dark clouds swirling overhead. Still, if there was even a sliver of hope, he'd take it. With a sharp breath, Jarek turned back to his squad. "We'll fight until the end, together." And then the world exploded in a blaze of light and sound. The first shots fired by the black ships hit the alien invaders with a devastating force that sent ripples through the skies. The shockwave reverberated across the battlefield, tearing apart the invaders' flagship with a single decisive strike. Earth's forces stood in stunned silence for a split second, the sudden reversal of power leaving them breathless. But Jarek knew better than to believe this was victory. No, this was merely the beginning of a new war, a war whose rules had yet to be written. And as the black ships descended further into Earth's atmosphere, each moment seemed to stretch in time, a waiting game that would determine whether humanity could truly fight for its place in the cosmos. The last of the alien ships, badly damaged and retreating, seemed to flicker and fade like a dying star. Jarek's voice was low, just above a whisper. "Get ready! They're not done yet!" And the battle raged on. Jarek's fingers tightened on the controls, the vibration of the console buzzing up his arm. The black ships, his mind couldn't fathom the enormity of it. The sky above was still heavy with the shadow of the massive vessel, as it hovered with a strange, serene authority, cutting through the ashen clouds like a blade through silk. The air thick with smoke and the acrid remnants of burning structures pressed in on him. The ground beneath his boots felt alive, trembling with anticipation as if the planet itself recognized the arrival of an ancient force. The alien forces, once unyielding in their brutal march, hesitated. They, too, seemed to pause in awe of the black ship's arrival. Jarek's gaze locked onto the warship's towering silhouette. He knew the aliens were watching, calculating their next move. But he couldn't afford to pause. Not for them. Not for anyone. "Commander, we've secured the last perimeter. Forces are waiting for orders." Lieutenant Callan's voice, steady but anxious, filtered through his earpiece. There was no joy in the tone, no relief. It was all business now, survival at all costs. "Hold," Jarek replied, his voice cold. "Get the rest of the fleet in position." Every second counted. Earth's remaining defenses were running low on ammunition, and their soldiers were exhausted, worn thin by days of unrelenting attacks. But now a new variable had entered the equation. The black ships might be the salvation humanity had hoped for, or they could be the weapon that would forever bind Earth's fate to the whims of an alien intelligence. He didn't have time to ponder what-ifs. The battle wasn't waiting for him to make sense of this. The first wave of invaders, battered from earlier skirmishes, rallied. Their ships, designed for speed and lethality, surged forward. Their weapons glowed with an ominous, unsettling light as they took aim at the black ships, preparing to test their power. Jarek's heart beat hard against his chest. His pulse quickened. "Target the enemy fleet. Full power on all cannons," he ordered, his eyes scanning the chaotic battlefield below. But the words felt like they didn't belong. How could they fight something they didn't fully understand? How could they hope to defeat an enemy that wasn't just technologically superior but also had no rules? The black ships shifted, their surface rippled, a gleaming sheen that shimmered like dark water under moonlight. With a low, guttural roar, an eruption of energy shot from one of the ships, cleaving the air with a sound that was both otherworldly and terrifyingly familiar. The blast pierced through the invaders' defenses, sending one of their ships careening into the atmosphere, trailing a burning tail of debris. The shockwaves spread across the battlefield, and Jarek's comms were drowned in static. "Holy hell," Sergeant Talon whispered, his voice cracking with disbelief. That was real power." Jarek didn't respond. He couldn't. His eyes were locked on the sight before him. The alien ships, once so sure of their superiority, began to waver. They regrouped, but the fear was palpable. The air around them seemed to crackle with a static charge, as if the very molecules had shifted, holding their breath. "Commander, we've got—" Callan's voice was suddenly drowned out by another deafening roar. This time it wasn't just a weapon blast. It was a hum, deep and reverberating, coming from the very heart of the black ships. The ship's hull shimmered again, then split open like the petals of an ancient flower, revealing the dark, glowing core within. A soft hum filled the air, almost like a heartbeat, growing louder, deeper. Jarek's eyes narrowed. "What the hell is that?" He didn't wait for an answer. He could already feel it in the pit of his stomach. The black ships weren't just here for defense. They were preparing for something bigger. "Take cover," Jarek barked. "Move fast now." But it was too late. A wave of force, not visible but somehow tangible, rippled out from the black ships. It wasn't light. It wasn't sound. It was something deeper, something that twisted at the fabric of reality itself. It hit the invaders' ships with a physical impact, a hammer blow that sent them tumbling, disintegrating in midair. Sparks and debris rained down, and a shockwave of heat and energy swept across the battlefield, throwing Jarek off balance. He barely held on to the console. His muscles tensed as the earth shuddered beneath him. "Hold your ground," he shouted, shaking off the disorientation. "This isn't over." The ground cracked beneath him as alien ships, their hulls shattered, began to retreat. A few tried to launch a counterattack, firing back with whatever energy they could muster. But the black ships remained silent, as if they were waiting for something. The battle, once chaotic, was now eerily quiet, with only the distant echoes of collapsing structures and the occasional tremor in the earth. "Status report," Jarek demanded, his voice edged with urgency. Callan's voice came back, more uncertain now. "Commander, we've lost contact with several units in the west. They're not responding." Jarek's mind raced. This wasn't victory. The black ship's appearance was no accident, and what he had seen so far was only a glimpse of their power. They had broken the alien advance, but at what cost? "Tell the ground forces to consolidate," Jarek ordered, his voice a low growl. "We can't keep this up forever." The black ships hung above them, silent and unmoving. The air felt thick, charged, as if the ships themselves were studying Earth, testing its defenses. Was this the beginning of a new alliance, or had humanity just made a deal with the devil? A new voice crackled over the comms, this one colder, more calculated than the first. It was the AI, the voice of the ships, now unmistakably clear. "Commander Vael," it said, its resonance reverberating in Jarek's chest. "You are correct to be wary. This is only the beginning. The invaders are but a tool, a precursor to the true threat." Jarek froze. The words echoed in his mind. The true threat? His heart skipped a beat as the weight of the message settled over him. The black ships weren't just here to defend Earth. They were here to prepare for something far worse. "Prepare yourselves," the AI continued, its tone devoid of emotion. "The battle is far from over, but Earth has a chance, if you do as I say." Jarek clenched his jaw. His instincts told him to disregard the AI, to follow his own plans. But something about the voice, something about the certainty behind it, kept him from doing so. "Explain yourself," Jarek demanded, stepping forward. "What do you mean, the true threat?" There was a long pause. The AI's response was chilling. "Not all enemies can be defeated with force alone. You will need more than weapons to survive this war." Jarek's fingers clenched into fists. His mind was already spinning with the possibilities. Allies, diplomacy. The words stuck in his throat. The true threat hadn't even arrived yet, and already the black ships were pushing humanity into a new kind of war, a war where the enemy wasn't just external, but internal too. The silence that followed the AI's message felt heavier than the battle that had just unfolded. Jarek knew, deep down, that the battle for Earth was far from over. The black ships had opened a door that no one could close, not yet. And whatever lay beyond, they were going to need more than firepower to fight it. "Get ready," Jarek murmured, his voice hard as steel. "We've just begun to fight." Jarek's eyes darted from the black ships to the scattered alien fleet. The once invincible invaders were now scattered, their formations broken, their air of superiority shattered. But the victory felt hollow. The black ships, magnificent and terrifying in their stillness, stood above him, silently observing the aftermath like ancient gods who had grown weary of watching humanity struggle. The battlefield below was a surreal scene of destruction. Earth's military forces, those few who had managed to survive the initial onslaught, were regrouping, their uniforms smeared with dirt and ash. The sky, once vibrant and clear, now stretched above them like a canvas of soot and dust, the remnants of fallen invaders streaking through the air like fading stars. Jarek stood at the edge of the command center, watching the movement below. His fingers drummed against the metal railing, a nervous tick he couldn't shake. A small part of him wanted to celebrate. After all, they had struck back. They had forced the invaders to retreat. But the larger part of him, the one that had been trained to think beyond the immediate, could not shake the feeling that this victory was merely a fleeting moment, a breath before something far darker emerged. "Commander Vael," Lieutenant Callan's voice interrupted his thoughts. The younger officer's face was grim, his usually calm demeanor now frayed. "The enemy is pulling back, but they're regrouping. The forces are coordinating something big." Jarek didn't respond immediately. Instead, his gaze remained locked on the horizon, where the remains of alien ships burned in the atmosphere. The black streaks of fire traced their downward spirals, like the last breaths of a dying monster. "What kind of force are we looking at?" Jarek asked, his voice low and controlled, though the tension in his jaw betrayed his growing anxiety. "Not sure yet," Callan replied. "They've been communicating in ways we can't decipher, but it's not a retreat. They're pulling back to launch something, a second wave." Jarek's eyes narrowed. He knew this was coming. The alien forces had been relentless since their first appearance, and now, in the face of unexpected resistance, they were recalibrating. It was only a matter of time before they returned stronger, more prepared, and when they did, Earth would have to be ready. "Get our forces to full readiness," Jarek ordered, his voice sharp. "I want every weapon online, every system prepared, and find out what they're planning. We don't have time for second guesses." Callan nodded and turned to relay the order, his footsteps fading into the murmur of the command center. Jarek stood alone for a moment, his eyes still fixed on the heavens, his mind racing. The black ships above remained still, their surface reflecting the dying light of the setting sun. They were eerily silent, their purpose unknown, their intentions a mystery. The AI's cryptic warning echoed in Jarek's mind. The battle is far from over. But Jarek had heard enough vague statements to know that there was more to the black ship's arrival than just a show of force. With a sudden sharpness, Jarek turned away from the view and began pacing. The black ships had delivered a devastating blow to the invaders, but the cost of their intervention, whatever that might be, remained uncertain. He had seen the power they possessed, but the sheer scale of their influence was still unknown. What had these ships been designed for? And why had they waited so long before coming to humanity's aid? "Commander Vael." The voice of Captain Farron, a seasoned officer, brought Jarek back to the present. The older man had been a pillar of strength throughout the war, but even he seemed uncertain in the face of the new threat that hung in the air like an impending storm. "What is it, Captain?" Jarek asked, his tone more curt than he intended. "The alien forces, they've vanished." Jarek paused, his mind processing the words. "Vanished?" he repeated, as if the word itself was too absurd to comprehend. The battlefield was still littered with the wreckage of their ships. There was no way they had simply disappeared. "How can they vanish? They're still out there. We're not seeing their fleet on our radar, but they're still out there. We lost contact with them. They're gone." Jarek gritted his teeth. The alien fleet didn't just vanish. This was a tactical retreat, and it was only a matter of time before they regrouped. But how could they have disappeared so completely? Something didn't feel right. The sense of urgency in his chest grew, like a pressure building up in the air, suffocating him. "You're sure about this?" Jarek asked, his voice tight. Captain Farron nodded. "Our scanners show no sign of them. They've either cloaked themselves or they've gone into some kind of deep space retreat. Either way, it's too quiet." Jarek exhaled slowly. "Get to work on the second scenario. I want to know exactly where they are." Captain Farron turned to leave, but Jarek caught him before he could walk away. "And Farron, keep it to the basics. I don't want any distractions. We're not getting lulled into thinking this is over. We both know better." Farron looked back, a faint nod acknowledging Jarek's command, but his eyes betrayed the same uncertainty that plagued the entire command center. The calm after the storm felt like a trick, and Jarek wasn't about to be caught off guard. As Captain Farron departed, Jarek moved toward the window, where the shadow of the black ships loomed larger than ever. They were silent, still as statues, their enormous frames dwarfing everything around them. But they were also waiting for something. Jarek didn't know what it was, but he felt it in his bones. The storm wasn't over. It was only beginning. "Commander," came a voice from behind. It was Lieutenant Callan again. His face was tight with a mix of concern and confusion. "We've intercepted another transmission. It's from the invaders." Jarek turned slowly, his pulse quickening. He'd been waiting for this moment, but he hadn't expected it to come so soon. Callan handed him the datapad, and Jarek's eyes flicked over the readout. The transmission was encrypted, but there was a strange, rhythmic pattern to it, something that didn't seem like the usual tactical jargon. "What does it say?" Jarek asked, though he had a sinking feeling that he already knew the answer. "It's not clear, but the language is different. It's almost like they're taunting us. They're asking about the black ships." Jarek's stomach turned. This was no ordinary enemy. These invaders had some connection to the black ships. They knew about them, perhaps even feared them. "Where are they?" Jarek growled, his hands trembling as he clutched the datapad. "They're preparing for another strike, Commander. They know we're vulnerable. The question is, do we have enough time to prepare?" Jarek turned to the window again. The black ships loomed large and silent, waiting for something, and deep within him, a nagging voice told him they weren't here to simply fight for Earth. There was something more, something they had been waiting for. And whatever it was, Jarek was about to find out. The tension in his chest tightened, the quiet before the storm had ended. Now the real fight was about to begin, and the mystery of the black ships was just beginning to unravel. Jarek's fingers gripped the console, the cool metal pressing against his palm as the air around him thickened. The unknown transmission that had come through moments ago continued to gnaw at him. It felt like a puzzle missing its pieces, the cryptic message from the invaders lingering in the back of his mind like an unshakable whisper. "What do they want with the black ships?" he muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible over the static that filled the room. The black ships still hovered high above Earth's shattered surface, unmoving but ever-present. Their imposing forms cut through the smoke-filled sky, like silent giants, their dark surfaces reflecting the dying light of the sun. Every instinct in Jarek screamed that something more was at play. These ships were not just a defense mechanism, and they weren't merely a lifeline for humanity. They were the key to something much larger, something that was being kept hidden from them. "Commander," Lieutenant Callan's voice crackled through the comms, "the invaders have begun reassembling. They're targeting something." Jarek's heart skipped a beat. "Targeting what?" "I'm not sure yet. We've detected a shift in their signals. It's like they're preparing for another offensive. But the frequency, there's something familiar about it, like they've identified a weakness." Jarek didn't need to hear more. He turned swiftly, his eyes scanning the horizon again, as if the answer might suddenly appear in the sky. He could feel the pressure building in his chest, the sensation that everything was spiraling, but the black ships remained silent, like unmoving sentinels. They hadn't fired again since the initial attack. Why were they waiting? "We need to prepare for their next move," Jarek said, his voice cold and commanding, though the tension in his gut was palpable. "Keep me updated on their movements, and get our forces in position. This isn't over." As Callan's voice receded into the background, Jarek's mind remained fixated on the black ships. There was something about the way they had descended into the atmosphere, the way they had interacted with the enemy. It was more than just technology. It was as if they were waiting for something. And whatever that something was, Jarek had a sinking feeling that it was tied to the very heart of the conflict. But what could they want with Earth's enemies? Were they truly allies, or was this all part of a deeper, more dangerous scheme? "Commander Vael," came another voice, this time from Captain Farron, his tone tight with concern. "We've been analyzing the transmissions from the invaders. There's something you need to see." Jarek didn't hesitate. He moved quickly to the display station, his boots clanging against the floor as he approached the holographic interface. Farron's face appeared on the screen, his brow furrowed as he spoke. "We've managed to decipher part of their communication," Farron began. "It's not just an attack. It's a request. They've been asking for the black ships. They're calling them the Watchers, and they seem to believe they hold the key to something, a power, a force, beyond what we've seen." Jarek's eyes narrowed. "Request? What do they mean by that? What do they want with the black ships?" "We're still unsure," Farron replied, his voice low. "But they're not attacking us just to conquer Earth. They're trying to draw us into a bigger game. There's something they believe they can gain from the black ships, something that's been hidden for millennia." Jarek felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. This was worse than he had anticipated. The invaders weren't just an external threat. They were part of something far larger, something that involved the black ships in ways Jarek had yet to comprehend. The room fell silent as Jarek processed the information. His mind raced, piecing together fragments of what they had uncovered so far. The black ships were no ordinary fleet. They were something ancient, something far more powerful than they had imagined. And the enemy wasn't just interested in conquering Earth. They were after the power hidden within these ships. But why? And how did the ship's dormant technology connect to this larger galactic struggle? "Get me the full transmission data," Jarek said, his voice sharp. "We need to understand what we're up against. If the enemy wants something from the black ships, we have to figure out what it is before they take it." Farron's face shifted into a grim expression. "Understood, Commander. But there's something else. We've detected more anomalies in the energy readings. The black ships are shifting." Jarek's eyes flicked to the sky. Sure enough, the silhouette of the black ships was no longer as static as it had been. There was a subtle movement, a shift in their formation that hadn't been there before. It was as if the ships were responding to the alien signals, as though they were preparing for something. "Jarek," Farron continued, his voice tinged with something like disbelief, "they're—" Suddenly the room shook with an intensity that knocked Jarek off balance. The walls groaned, as if the very structure of the command center was being tested. His eyes snapped to the window where the black ships now emitted a low, vibrating hum. This time it was a physical sensation that rattled his bones. The sky seemed to bend, as if reality itself was warping around the ships. The black ships began to glow, their surfaces radiating with an otherworldly light, casting sharp shadows across the horizon. Jarek could feel the change in the air, a shift so profound it felt like the earth itself was holding its breath. The ships had awakened, but now they were doing something far more dangerous, something he could not yet understand. "Hold on!" Jarek shouted, his voice barely rising above the tremor of the building. He rushed toward the communications panel, trying to make sense of the chaos unfolding around him. "Get eyes on those ships. What are they doing?" Before anyone could respond, another explosion rocked the city. The force was so powerful it rattled the ground beneath their feet, shaking the command center with a deafening crack. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling, filling the air with a choking cloud. The walls flickered and buzzed with static. "Report!" Jarek barked, his chest tight as he struggled to regain his footing. Lieutenant Callan's voice came back frantic. "Sir, they've They've opened a portal. It's not like anything we've seen before. It's dimensional. We're looking at something entirely new. Jarek's mind raced, processing the impossible. A portal? What kind of power did the black ships wield, and why were they opening it now? I need more information now. Jarek's voice cracked with urgency, but as the words left his mouth, he knew. The black ships weren't here just to fight for Earth. They were here to unlock something. And whatever lay beyond that portal was something no one on Earth, or the enemy, could have predicted. The tension in the air thickened as Jarek stared at the sky, his heart pounding in his chest. The world was on the brink of something far more dangerous than any of them had anticipated. And as the portal began to expand, Jarek realized that this battle was just the beginning. Whatever the black ships were hiding, it was something that would change the course of humanity's fate forever. Prepare for the worst, Jarek muttered under his breath, because we're about to step into the unknown. The black ship's portal widened, its swirling edges bleeding light into the darkened sky. It was no longer a simple rift, but an unfolding chasm, an unnatural force ripping through the fabric of reality. The ground trembled beneath Jarek's boots, the vibrations sending shards of glass and metal cascading to the floor. Every step felt like a heavy one as his eyes remained fixed on the portal, where the very air seemed to shimmer, bending unnaturally around the event horizon. The sky above had turned an eerie shade of violet, like the planet was slowly being suffocated by the strange, otherworldly glow emanating from the black ships. Every surface, from the rubble-strewn ground to the cracked buildings, reflected a faint, unnatural light. The wind picked up, sharp and cold, sending a chill through the command center as though a storm was rapidly descending. Jarek stood motionless for a moment, the pressure of the situation building around him. The sense of something ancient and powerful pulsed from the portal, like a heartbeat that resonated in his chest. The black ship's silence had been replaced by an almost tangible energy, as though they were waiting for something or someone to step through. "Commander!" The urgency in Callan's voice broke through Jarek's thoughts. "The enemy has reappeared. They're organizing something, preparing for an assault." Jarek's gaze never left the portal, but he could hear the faint click of weapon systems activating across the base. The tension in the room thickened as the soldiers gathered around, murmuring, their faces a mix of disbelief and fear. No one had expected this, not after the black ship's initial strike. "Callan," Jarek said, his voice low and controlled, "have our forces begin preparations. But keep everything locked down. I need full situational awareness before we do anything. No more surprises." Callan nodded and turned toward the communication panel, his fingers flying across the interface. But Jarek's focus remained unwavering on the rift above them. Something was emerging. He could feel it in his bones. The shift in the atmosphere was unmistakable. The portal pulsed again, sending out a wave of invisible energy that knocked Jarek off balance. He steadied himself, his boots scraping against the cold floor as the room seemed to bend around him. Suddenly the air split with a sharp crack, and something large, massive even, began to emerge from the rift. At first it was just a shadow, faint and indistinct. Then it grew clearer, an immense shape, vast and elongated, its surface dark and smooth, radiating a cold, otherworldly light. It was like nothing Jarek had ever seen, a ship that didn't belong in any known star system. "We're not alone," Jarek whispered, though his words felt like a prayer. He watched as the object inched further into the atmosphere, its edges slicing through the haze of smoke and fire that still hung over the battlefield. "Commander, you need to see this." Captain Farron's voice was low, almost reverent as he approached. "We've found something. A pattern. In the energy readings. The black ships aren't just opening a portal. They're drawing the enemy to this location." Jarek didn't answer. His mind was already racing, pulling together the pieces that didn't quite fit. Why were the black ships creating this rift? What did it have to do with the alien forces? And why hadn't they made their move sooner? "Farron, what are we looking at?" Jarek asked, his tone hard. Captain Farron's face was pale, his jaw tight. "Sir, it looks like a fleet, but not just any fleet. It's..." He swallowed hard, his fingers trembling as he swiped through the data. The ships are unlike anything we've encountered. These readings they're ancient, too ancient. Jarek's thoughts snapped back to the black ships, the AI's cryptic message reverberating in his mind. The battle is far from over. He couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the black ships had been waiting for this moment, not for Earth's salvation, but for something far bigger. "Get ready," Jarek ordered, his voice thick with the weight of impending doom. "This is just the beginning." The ground shook again, more violently this time. The walls of the command center groaned, and lights flickered. Jarek's gaze snapped upward. The enormous shape that had emerged from the rift was no longer alone. A host of ships, smaller than the initial one but still formidable, were materializing one by one. They slipped through the tear in reality like a dark wave, their movement so precise and calculated that it was almost as if they were following an ancient rhythm, a song too old for anyone to understand. Jarek's stomach churned. He had known they weren't alone, but this was something else entirely. "Commander," Callan's voice came through, breathless with urgency. "The enemy is gathering forces. We're getting more hostile signatures on all fronts. They've planned this. Every move, every decision has led to this." "Then we hold our ground," Jarek snapped, his pulse quickening. He could feel the pressure building, as if the very air was thickening, pressing down on him. "I won't let Earth fall to them. We stand here, and we fight until the end." The sky above seemed to crack open as another ship materialized, this one far larger, its shape twisting unnaturally as though the laws of physics themselves had been bent to accommodate it. The ship's surface shimmered with iridescence, a strange dark hue that twisted and morphed as if it were living. The ship was not made of metal, but of something organic, something that pulsed with a life of its own. "Jarek!" Farron's voice was desperate now, frantic. "The ships, they're linked. They're connected somehow. This isn't just an invasion. They're bringing something into our system, something alive." "Alive?" Jarek turned sharply to face Farron, his mind struggling to process the implications of the words. "What do you mean by alive?" But Farron didn't have time to answer. The command center's lights flickered once more, and a loud, keening noise pierced through the walls. It wasn't mechanical, it wasn't artificial. It was the sound of something old, ancient, something that had been waiting in the dark for eons, yearning for release. The doors to the command center blasted open, sending a rush of cold air into the room. One of the black ships above them trembled slightly, as if it were reacting to something unseen. A low growl, deep and reverberating, emanated from within the walls of the ship itself. "Stay sharp," Jarek ordered, his voice firm despite the growing unease in his chest. "We've lost the element of surprise, but we still have the upper hand. Get every asset ready for combat. We don't know what they're bringing, but we'll be damned if we don't fight." The air was thick with uncertainty as Jarek's soldiers scrambled to prepare, their faces hardened with resolve. But deep down they all knew this was no longer just about fighting for survival. This was about something far larger, something more incomprehensible than any of them could have imagined. The black ships weren't just protecting Earth. They were part of a larger, more dangerous plan. And Jarek could feel the pieces falling into place one by one. But as the enemy forces continued to emerge from the rift, he understood one undeniable truth. Whatever lay beyond that portal, humanity had no choice but to face it. And the true fight had only just begun. The black ship's portal widened, its swirling edges bleeding light into the darkened sky. It was no longer a simple rift, but an unfolding chasm, an unnatural force ripping through the fabric of reality. The ground trembled beneath Jarek's boots, the vibration sending shards of glass and metal cascading to the floor. Every step felt like a heavy one as his eyes remained fixed on the portal, where the very air seemed to shimmer, bending unnaturally around the event horizon. The sky above had turned an eerie shade of violet, like the planet was slowly being suffocated by the strange, otherworldly glow emanating from the black ships. Every surface, from the rubble-strewn ground to the cracked buildings, reflected a faint, unnatural light. The wind picked up, sharp and cold, sending a chill through the command center, as though a storm was rapidly descending. Jarek stood motionless for a moment, the pressure of the situation building around him. The sense of something ancient and powerful pulsed from the portal, like a heartbeat that resonated in his chest. The black ship's silence had been replaced by an almost tangible energy, as though they were waiting for something or someone to step through. "Commander!" The urgency in Callan's voice broke through Jarek's thoughts. "The enemy has reappeared. They're organizing something, preparing for an assault." Jarek's gaze never left the portal, but he could hear the faint click of weapon systems activating across the base. The tension in the room thickened as the soldiers gathered around, murmuring, their faces a mix of disbelief and fear. No one had expected this, not after the black ship's initial strike. "Callan," Jarek said, his voice low and controlled, "have our forces begin preparations. But keep everything locked down. I need full situational awareness before we do anything. No more surprises." Callan nodded and turned toward the communication panel, his fingers flying across the interface. But Jarek's focus remained unwavering on the rift above them. Something was emerging. He could feel it in his bones. The shift in the atmosphere was unmistakable. The portal pulsed again, sending out a wave of invisible energy that knocked Jarek off balance. He steadied himself, his boots scraping against the cold floor as the room seemed to bend around him. Suddenly the air split with a sharp crack, and something large, massive even, began to emerge from the rift. At first, it was just a shadow, faint and indistinct. Then it grew clearer. An immense shape, vast and elongated, its surface dark and smooth, radiating a cold, otherworldly light. It was like nothing Jarek had ever seen, a ship that didn't belong in any known star system. "We're not alone," Jarek whispered, though his words felt like a prayer. He watched as the object inched further into the atmosphere, its edges slicing through the haze of smoke and fire that still hung over the battlefield. "Commander, you need to see this." Captain Farron's voice was low, almost reverent as he approached. "We've found something, a pattern, in the energy readings. The black ships aren't just opening a portal, they're drawing the enemy to this location." Jarek didn't answer. His mind was already racing, pulling together the pieces that didn't quite fit. Why were the black ships creating this rift? What did it have to do with the alien forces? And why hadn't they made their move sooner? "Farron, what are we looking at?" Jarek asked, his tone hard. Captain Farron's face was pale, his jaw tight. "Sir, it looks like a fleet, but not just any fleet. It's—" He swallowed hard, his fingers trembling as he swiped through the data. "The ships are unlike anything we've encountered. These readings they're ancient. Too ancient." Jarek's thoughts snapped back to the black ships, the AI's cryptic message reverberating in his mind. The battle is far from over. He couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the black ships had been waiting for this moment. Not for Earth's salvation, but for something far bigger. "Get ready," Jarek ordered, his voice thick with the weight of impending doom. "This is just the beginning." The ground shook again, more violently this time. The walls of the command center groaned, and lights flickered. Jarek's gaze snapped upward. The enormous shape that had emerged from the rift was no longer alone. A host of ships, smaller than the initial one but still formidable, were materializing, one by one. They slipped through the tear in reality like a dark wave, their movements so precise and calculated that it was almost as if they were following an ancient rhythm, a song too old for anyone to understand. Jarek's stomach churned. He had known they weren't alone, but this was something else entirely. "Commander," Callan's voice came through, breathless with urgency. "The enemy is gathering forces. We're getting more hostile signatures on all fronts. They've planned this. Every move, every decision has led to this." "Then we hold our ground," Jarek snapped, his pulse quickening. He could feel the pressure building as if the very air was thickening, pressing down on him. "I won't let Earth fall to them. We stand here, and we fight until the end." The sky above seemed to crack open as another ship materialized, this one far larger, its shape twisting unnaturally as though the laws of physics themselves had been bent to accommodate it. The ship's surface shimmered with iridescence, a strange dark hue that twisted and morphed as if it were living. The ship was not made of metal, but of something organic, something that pulsed with a life of its own. Jarek! Farron's voice was desperate now, frantic. The ships, they're linked. They're connected somehow. This isn't just an invasion. They're bringing something into our system, something alive. Alive? Jarek turned sharply to face Farron, his mind struggling to process the implications of the words. What do you mean by alive? But Farron didn't have time to answer. The command center's lights flickered once more, and a loud, keening noise pierced through the walls. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't artificial. It was the sound of something old, ancient. Something that had been waiting in the dark for eons, yearning for release. The doors to the command center blasted open, sending a rush of cold air into the room. One of the black ships above them trembled slightly, as if it were reacting to something unseen. A low growl, deep and reverberating, emanated from within the walls of the ship itself. "Stay sharp," Jarek ordered, his voice firm despite the growing unease in his chest. "We've lost the element of surprise, but we still have the upper hand. Get every asset ready for combat. We don't know what they're bringing, but we'll be damned if we don't fight." The air was thick with uncertainty as Jarek's soldiers scrambled to prepare, their faces hardened with resolve. But deep down, they all knew. This was no longer just about fighting for survival. This was about something far larger, something more incomprehensible than any of them could have imagined. The black ships weren't just protecting Earth. They were part of a larger, more dangerous plan, and Jarek could feel the pieces falling into place one by one. But as the enemy forces continued to emerge from the rift, he understood one undeniable truth. Whatever lay beyond that portal, humanity had no choice but to face it. The silence after the last ship emerged from the rift was suffocating. Jarek stood at the center of the command center, his chest tightening with every passing second as the walls trembled once more, the air growing thick with a strange energy. The black ships hung in the atmosphere like gods of an ancient age, their enormous shapes casting long, dark shadows over the battlefield below. Above them, the new arrivals, vast and incomprehensible, continued to emerge, their surfaces undulating as if they were alive. Jarek's hands gripped the console, fingers digging into the metal, his thoughts racing. "Commander Vael, we're getting more readings." Callan's voice cut through the tension, his words crackling with urgency. "This is unlike anything we've encountered before. These ships, they're not just ships." Jarek's gaze flicked to the display as new data poured in. The strange ships pulsed with life, each flicker of light casting eerie shadows across the cityscape. The alien vessels, previously so aggressive and unwavering in their attacks, now seemed to hesitate, as if drawn to the same force that had brought the black ships into the atmosphere. It was as if the very space around them had become alive, pulsing with an energy far older and darker than anything humanity had ever encountered. "Don't tell me they're retreating," Jarek muttered, his voice thick with frustration. "No, sir," Callan replied quickly, his voice steady but tinged with awe. "They're gathering, but it's like they're waiting for something. A signal, perhaps. It's too calculated." Jarek's mind spun, racing to connect the dots. The alien forces were no longer attacking as a unified front. Their formations had broken, and now they circled, waiting. But for what? The black ships had struck with brutal force, and yet the invaders weren't retreating. They were preparing for something far more dangerous. But what? "We're being tested," Jarek said, under his breath, his words catching in the charged air of the command center. The black ships above him began to shift, their forms shifting imperceptibly as though responding to some unseen trigger. The portal that had opened in the sky continued to pulse, its light growing stronger, more vibrant, like a heartbeat too slow and deep to follow. "Get me the AI," Jarek snapped, turning toward his console. "I need answers. Now!" The room buzzed with activity, soldiers scurrying to their stations as the weight of the moment settled in. Callan stepped closer, his face a mixture of confusion and apprehension. The connection to the black ship's AI flared to life, its cold, metallic voice filling the room with an unsettling clarity. "You seek answers, Commander Vael," The AI spoke, its tone as impassive as ever. "The time has come for you to understand." Jarek's pulse quickened. "What do you mean by that? Why are the invaders waiting? What's the connection between the black ships and this enemy?" "Not all things can be understood through force alone," the AI continued, its words laden with a strange finality. "What you face is not a simple war. The enemy you have been fighting is but a fraction of what is to come. And what you seek is not merely the preservation of your world. It is a deeper, more ancient conflict. The black ships were never meant to protect Earth alone." Jarek's chest tightened as the implications of the AI's words slowly sank in. "What are you saying? Are you telling me that the black ships are just a tool?" The AI's response was chilling. "The ships are a gateway, a tool for awakening what has been dormant. Earth is but a small part of a much larger design, Commander Vael. The invaders are not your true enemy. They are simply the harbingers of what comes next." A cold shiver ran down Jarek's spine as he processed the words. Earth was merely a stepping stone in a much larger cosmic game. The black ships, these ancient, powerful vessels that had descended from the heavens, were not here to protect humanity. They were here to facilitate a far greater purpose, one that Jarek had no understanding of. "What comes next?" Jarek's voice trembled despite himself. "What are we up against?" There was a long pause. The air in the room thickened as the AI's words hung in the balance. "The true enemy lies beyond the rift," it said, its voice now carrying a sense of finality. "They will come through when the time is right, and Earth will play its part." A loud crack split the air, followed by the sound of violent shaking. The ground beneath them rumbled, and the building seemed to sway as if it were about to collapse. The air was electric, alive with anticipation. Whatever was coming, it was now imminent. "Get everyone ready," Jarek commanded, his voice hardening. "We don't know what we're dealing with, but we're about to find out." Outside, the sky had turned black as night, even though it was still midday. The energy from the portal above had begun to leak into the atmosphere, distorting the very fabric of reality. The once clear sky was now rippling like the surface of a pond disturbed by something beneath. "Sir," Callan said, his voice now trembling with uncertainty, "the rift, it's widening. Something's coming through." Jarek's eyes widened as he turned toward the window, his breath catching in his throat. The air outside seemed to distort further, and within the blackness of the portal, something large began to emerge. It was like watching a massive shadow move through the rift, its edges jagged and undefined, as if it were a living thing, breathing in the same space. "It's happening," Jarek whispered, his mind racing. He had been prepared for a war, prepared to fight with everything humanity had. But this was something he couldn't have imagined. The enemy they had fought had been only a prelude, a shadow of what was to come. The ground quaked beneath them, and a shockwave of energy erupted from the portal. The command center's windows shattered, and the air was filled with the screech of bending metal. A deafening roar filled the air, a noise so profound it seemed to reverberate deep inside Jarek's chest. And then, as if in slow motion, the object emerging from the rift began to take shape. It was unlike any ship, any force, Jarek had ever seen. It was more than a ship. It was a leviathan, a massive entity composed of shifting shadows and light. Its surface pulsed with an unholy glow, and Jarek could feel the weight of its presence pressing down on him. This was no longer a battle for survival. This was the beginning of something far darker, far older. And in that moment, Jarek realized that humanity was no longer fighting to protect Earth. They were fighting for something far more crucial, a place in a galactic conflict that had been brewing for centuries. A conflict that, if they failed, would wipe them from existence without a second thought. "Brace yourselves," Jarek whispered, his voice a mixture of dread and resolve. "This is only the beginning." The weight of the moment bore down on Jarek as the massive shape continued to emerge from the rift, its edges shifting and twisting in unnatural ways. The light it emitted bent the air around it, casting an eerie glow that washed over the command center. The world outside, once so familiar, now felt strange and foreign. Every step Jarek took felt heavier, as though the atmosphere itself had thickened, suffocating him with a sense of inevitability. His mind raced, the constant hum of activity around him fading into a dull roar as he focused on the task ahead. Earth was at a crossroads, and the choices made in the next few minutes would determine whether humanity survived or was swallowed by the cosmic forces that had just begun to reveal themselves. The invaders were no longer the primary threat. No, this new entity, this unimaginable force, was something far worse. The black ships had brought them here, but they weren't the saviors they had once appeared to be. They had opened the door to something far darker. "Commander Vael," Captain Farron's voice broke through Jarek's thoughts, steady but tinged with uncertainty. "We've completed the analysis of the energy readings. The ships, they're not just vessels. They're part of something larger. They're a beacon calling something or someone into our system." Jarek's chest tightened. "A beacon?" he repeated, his voice barely audible. "Calling who?" "Something ancient," Farron replied, his tone grim. "We can't pinpoint it, but the readings are off the charts. It's like they're preparing for an arrival. And the rift? It's not just an opening. It's a doorway. A doorway." The word lingered in the air like a curse. The command center had fallen into a tense silence. Around Jarek, his officers continued to work, eyes flicking nervously to the screens, fingers moving with practiced precision, but none of them had the answers. None of them knew what to expect when the other side of the rift finally revealed itself. "Callan," Jarek said, his voice sharp, "I need a full report on our forces. What do we have left?" Callan moved to the console, his face pale but composed. "We've got limited assets, Commander. Most of our front lines have collapsed, and the Black Ship's intervention hasn't been enough to hold the enemy back for good. Our main fleet is struggling to regroup." Jarek clenched his jaw. "What about our tactical units? Ground forces?" "Dispersed, sir. We've lost communication with several key units in the field. There's a lot of confusion, and morale is low." The information hit Jarek like a punch to the gut. They were on the brink of collapse, and yet the enemy wasn't even the greatest threat anymore. The black ships had changed the game, but not in the way Jarek had hoped. He turned his gaze toward the viewport, where the shadow of the black ships loomed, silent and unreadable. They had arrived with such power, but now they seemed almost passive, as if waiting for something or someone to give them purpose. It was time to take control. Jarek exhaled, feeling the weight of his next words settle on him. "We need a plan, a real one. The enemy's regrouping, and we don't know how long we have. Get the strategy teams together. We need to consolidate our forces and prepare for whatever comes next." Callan nodded and hurried off to assemble the teams. Jarek turned to Farron. "What's the status on the portal? Any new developments?" Farron grimaced. "The rift's energy is fluctuating. It's almost as if it's alive. The ships are responding to it, drawing power from it. I don't know if we'll be able to stop it from expanding further." Jarek's mind began to churn with possibilities. If we can't stop the rift, then we need to turn it into an advantage. What happens if we can neutralize the ships surrounding the portal? Farron glanced at the screen, then back at Jarek. "That could destabilize the rift, but we'd need a focused, concentrated strike. It'd take everything we have." "Then we make it happen," Jarek said firmly, his voice low and determined. "Get the fleet in position. We'll hit them with everything we've got." Farron hesitated, his eyes flickering with doubt. "Sir, if we do that, if we strike the ships and disrupt the rift, it could backfire. We might inadvertently trigger something far worse." Jarek fixed his gaze on the captain. "I understand the risks, Farron, but if we do nothing, we're as good as dead." A brief silence passed between them before Farron nodded. "Understood, Commander." The command center buzzed with activity as Jarek's plan began to take shape. Every officer and soldier in the room knew what was at stake. And though fear lingered in the air, so did resolve. Humanity had reached the edge of the abyss, and the time for hesitation was over. "Listen up," Jarek said, addressing his officers and soldiers who had gathered around him. "We don't know what's coming through that rift, but we do know this. The black ships brought us here. They gave us a chance. Now we take that chance and fight back. He turned to the tactical displays, watching the various battle lines flicker across the screens. Our forces are scattered, but we're not out of options. We're going to hit the invaders with everything we have. I want every asset ready. We'll use the black ships as our anchor, but this fight isn't theirs. It's ours. Callan's voice broke through the silence, crisp and clear. We've gathered the last of our fleet into a cohesive unit. We're ready to move, Commander. What's the strike order? Target the alien fleet around the rift, Jarek said, pointing at the map. We hit them hard. We break their formation, disrupt their systems, and we'll draw the rift's energy into our own forces. Then we hit the portal itself. No hesitation. We hold nothing back. The room buzzed with renewed energy as Jarek's words settled into their minds. There was a plan, a clear path forward, and for the first time in days, Jarek saw the spark of hope in the eyes of his soldiers. We strike at dawn, Jarek said, his voice steady. Get to your stations. This is our last chance. The team dispersed, and Jarek remained standing, his gaze never leaving the portal above. It loomed like an all-consuming force, but Jarek had a plan, a real, tangible plan. He could feel the pulse of the battle in his chest, each beat louder than the last. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And if the enemy wanted Earth, they would have to tear it from humanity's cold, dead hands. As the clock ticked down to the hour of the strike, Jarek's resolve only hardened. There was no going back now. The war was about to reach its climax, and whether Earth survived or perished would be decided by the next move. Ready, Jarek whispered to himself, his hands clenched into fists. Let them come. Dawn broke in an explosion of crimson and gold, casting a violent glow over the battlefield. The skies seemed to tremble with anticipation as the rift above continued to expand, widening into a gaping maw that threatened to swallow the very air. Jarek stood at the front lines, the weight of the moment pressing down on him like a boulder. The air was thick with tension, the sharp bite of cold wind cutting through the battlefield as the last remnants of Earth's defenses gathered for what would likely be the final strike. The alien fleet, its ships dark and foreboding, circled the rift like predators preparing to pounce. And beyond them, the black ships, silent sentinels, vast and still, remained poised above, their massive forms casting long shadows over the desolate landscape below. Jarek had seen their power, felt it in the very bones of Earth. But this was different. The enemy, the invaders, were preparing for something more, something beyond even the immediate battle. He could sense it, like an invisible weight pressing down on the planet. Commander, Captain Farron's voice was low, urgent. The fleet is in position. We're ready when you are. Jarek's gaze remained fixed on the horizon, the colors of dawn painting the sky with a brutal, unforgiving light. His fingers were tight around the console in front of him, but his mind was focused on something deeper than strategy. The AI's words echoed in his mind, haunting him. Earth is but a small part of a much larger design. He hadn't been sure what that meant until now. As the enemy forces gathered, Jarek realized that the black ships were not just a symbol of humanity's past. They were the harbingers of something far greater, something humanity had no choice but to face. This was their moment of truth. Whether they lived or died, it was up to them. And in that final hour, Earth's survival would be determined not just by technology or firepower, but by something far more profound. We're not just fighting for Earth anymore, Jarek murmured under his breath, his voice rough with the weight of his decision. We're fighting for everything. Beside him, Callan, a young officer who had followed Jarek through every step of this war, spoke quietly, but there was no mistaking the fire in his voice. Then let's give them hell. Jarek turned to him, a ghost of a smile playing at the edge of his lips. You'll have your chance. The ground vibrated beneath them again, and this time, Jarek didn't flinch. The enemy was moving. The time for hesitation was over. His eyes locked onto the rift, where the first of the massive ships emerged from the void, a monstrous form that seemed to defy the laws of physics as it shifted and reconfigured in the air. It was not like the black ships, no, it was alive, breathing, writhing. An alien leviathan, a creature from another world. "Target the fleet," Jarek ordered, his voice cold and resolute. "And hold nothing back." The final attack began. The black ships, their dark hulls glistening in the light of the breaking dawn, came to life. A low, thunderous roar filled the air as their weapons activated, the ground shaking beneath them as their massive railguns fired. Earth's remaining forces, though battered and bruised, followed suit. The air filled with the sharp crack of weapons fire, the deep rumble of explosions, and the high-pitched scream of debris as it tore through the atmosphere. Jarek's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the alien fleet begin to disintegrate. Their ships, once so menacing and relentless, were now burning wrecks, their energy systems collapsing under the weight of the black ship's devastating firepower. But it wasn't enough. The real fight had yet to come. "Focus fire on the portal," Jarek barked. "We need to shut it down before more of them get through." The battle intensified. Explosions lit up the sky as Earth's final line of defense collided with the alien forces. Ships fell from the sky, their dark forms turning to ash before they could even hit the ground. But Jarek knew it wasn't just firepower that would win this battle. It was the resolve of every man and woman still standing, the courage to face the unknown. It was Earth's refusal to yield. As the final push came, Jarek's mind snapped into focus. The black ships had given them a chance, but now that chance had to be seized. They could not falter, could not hesitate. The time had come for humanity to rise above the chaos, to prove that they were more than just survivors. They were warriors. A voice crackled over the comms, Callan's voice, sharp with adrenaline. "Commander, the rift is destabilizing. It's going to collapse." Jarek didn't waste a second. He knew what needed to be done. His hands flew over the controls, his mind calculating every move with precision. Earth's forces, guided by the black ship's unwavering support, launched a final assault. The portal began to twist, its edges curling in on itself as the combined firepower of Earth's remaining forces focused on it. A blinding light erupted from the rift as it began to collapse, a shockwave so powerful that it sent the ground cracking beneath their feet. "Hold steady," Jarek shouted. "It's almost over." The enemy's fleet was in disarray, their remaining ships scattering into the void, unable to withstand the combined might of humanity's last stand. But Jarek's heart was heavy as he watched the rift shrink into nothingness. They had won, for now, but the cost had been immense. As the final remnants of the alien fleet disintegrated in the sky, Jarek stood motionless, his eyes scanning the destruction below. The battlefield was littered with the wreckage of both sides, the once vibrant city now reduced to ashes. Earth had been scarred, but it had survived. The enemy had been pushed back, and humanity had stood its ground. Against all odds, they had fought not just for survival, but for their place in the universe. The black ships, having fulfilled their purpose, began to retreat into the sky, their forms fading into the distance like shadows in the fading light. They had given humanity the chance to fight, but now they were leaving. Their mission was complete. Jarek exhaled slowly, his heart still racing. He could hear the shuffling of footsteps behind him, the quiet murmur of voices as his officers and soldiers began to process the aftermath. They had lost much, but they had gained something even more powerful, a belief in their own strength. "We did it," Callan said, his voice hoarse with disbelief. Jarek nodded, but the weight of his words still pressed down on him. "We did," he replied quietly. "But we didn't just fight for Earth. We fought for all of humanity, for what we can become." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of gold and red, Jarek knew the truth. This battle, this victory, was more than just a testament to humanity's survival. It was a declaration. Humanity was no longer just a small, isolated species, no longer a footnote in the history of the universe. They had stood up, they had fought back, and they had won. The black ships had given them the tools, but it was humanity's unyielding will that had carried them through. "Remember this day," Jarek whispered to himself, his voice barely audible over the wind. "This is our moment." And with that, Earth stood at the threshold of a new era, a time when humanity, for the first time in history, truly understood its own strength.